Welcome back. Let us continue. Now we are continuing with the application to divide the value in the given ratio. Our question reads as follows. Cement, sand, and stones are to be mixed in the ratio 1:2:3 to make high-strength concrete. So now it's cement is to sand is to stones. And the ratio that we are having is 1:2:3. So now the question is, how many wheelbarrows of sand and stones are needed to make 30 wheelbarrows of concrete? So now we must calculate both the wheelbarrows for sand and stones. So before we can even calculate, we must first determine the sum. So let us determine the sum of the values in a ratio 1 + 2 + 3, which equals to 6. So now we can start with sand. We know that the proportion of sand is 2. So if the proportion of sand is 2, then for us to determine how many wheelbarrows will be needed, we will then say 2 divided by 6, we multiply by the 30 wheelbarrows of the concrete which is needed. So now let us press the calculator together to get our answer. 2 divided by 6, we multiply this by 30. What I get is 10. So we need 10 wheelbarrows of sand. Now let us calculate how many wheelbarrows of stones are needed. So now this is the total for sand. So now we can calculate the total for stones. We know the proportion of stones is 3. So we can write 3 divided by 6. We multiply by the total, which is 30. And let us press the calculator together. So we will have 3 divided by 6, multiply by 30. And then what we get, let me press again. I think I made a mistake because I don't get the answer. 3 divided by 6, multiply by 30. What I get is 15. So we need 15 wheelbarrows of stones and we need 10 wheelbarrows of sand. This is the calculation which was needed. So in short, to summarize, to divide the amount or to divide the value in a given ratio, remember, number 1, you get the sum of the values in that particular ratio. And from there, you identify the proportion which is given. Like in the first case, it was sand, and the proportion of sand is 2, and you divide 2 by the sum that has been calculated. You multiply by the 30, which is the total given, and the answer we got is 10. And then secondly, it was for the stones, 3 divided by 6 because the proportion of stones is 6 and we multiply by 30 and we get 15. I think this brings us to the end of our lesson. I just want to summarize what we have learned. Number 1, we have learned converting between different forms of ratio. Remember that when we convert between different forms of ratio, you should make sure that the units are the same. Secondly, we have learned on converting equivalent ratios. Remember, when we convert equivalent ratios, because it doesn't mean that the units are the same, you must remember to multiply both sides by the given value. And number 3, determining the missing values in a ratio. To determine the missing values in a ratio, remember, we must first determine the sum of the values in the ratio. And then from there, identify that proportion which is required and multiply it by the total which has been given. And finally, divide the amount in the given ratio. To divide the amount in the given ratio, actually the method to do this too, it's exactly the same. So now you are going to add the values in a ratio, and then you identify the proportion, you multiply by the sum of money or the sum of values given. Just to sum up, the new weights that you learned is the ratio. Remember, ratio is a comparison of two or more numbers that are usually of the same type or the measurement. Equivalent ratios, remember, these are two ratios which are not the same. And then the numerator we said is the value which appears on top of the fraction. The denominator we said is the value that appears at the bottom of your fraction. And proportion we said we mean part of the ratio, which is part of a whole. And let us have a look at the common errors. The common errors that you are making is that you determine the values while using different units. Remember, we say the units should always be the same. You use the wrong proportion when determining the missing fraction. For you to get the right proportion, you always write. If we say x to flour, just write x and then write flowers and put the proportions underneath so that you can use the correct proportion. And again, multiplying instead of dividing when calculating the missing fraction, and vice versa. Just make sure that you know when to multiply and when to divide. And then not getting the sum of ratios first when calculating the value to be shared. Remember, there's no way you can calculate the value to be shared before you can calculate the sum first. You calculate the sum of the values in a ratio, then you identify specifically the ratio that should be used. Now here is a challenge question. Dudu has brought fruit combos for her family. The proportion of bananas, apples, and oranges is 2:3:4 respectively. She bought 36 fruits in total. Show that the number of apples she bought were 12. So I hope you had a great time. You enjoyed this lesson. You will take time to revise and do this challenge question. And I challenge you, I hope you will do better in this lesson. And when you go back to school, you will excel and you will share the knowledge that you've learned with other learners, and also invite them to attend other lessons. Thank you so much. Keep well.